Welcome everyone. I want to first start off by thanking everyone for coming out to our second information session to support the Pittsburgh Innovation Case Competition. My name is Justin. I serve as the president of the Carnegie Mellon Graduate Consulting Club. And so this information session is going to be largely composed of talking about what is a case and how to structure a case. And that's going to be led by David and Shreyas. And following them, I'm going to come back with a short presentation on what a case competition presentation may look like, and maybe you can kind of get an idea of, once you actually try to solve a case, how do you actually structure those into slides and support those with recommendations and findings. So I'll let David and Shreyas take it away.
Hello, my name is David. I am the VP of Case Preparation from the Graduate Consulting Club in Carnegie Mellon. Some of my background, I was a consultant, a management consultant for 3 years back in Colombia. I've done 2 case competitions. One, I got to the final round, and the other one was not so good, but I have learned a lot on these past experiences. So I want to tell you what to expect when you face a case, and if you decide to participate. I hope this information is useful for you guys. So let's go a little bit through the agenda. So first, let's talk about what is a case, then the structure of a case, how to solve a case, my tips and recommendations, personal, maybe Justin and Shreyas have more recommendations. And at the end, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience in the 2 case competitions I've been participating in. So what is a case? So a case is it's a business or a business issue or a business problem that a company or an organization is facing, and it's described in a few sentences or a small prompt that gives you an insight of the problem. The idea is that you would have limited data of what the situation is, and with those limited data, you have to go and search more information and make an informed recommendation in order to solve the problem or the issue that the organization is facing. The important thing is that it's the group that wins is not the group that gets to the best, to complete the best solution, but the group that approaches the solution the best way. There are several common cases, type of cases. For example, profitability, like an organization is losing profits, so it could be something about revenue, about cost, or an organization wants to enter a market, so what should we consider in order to enter that market, or we want to merge or acquire another company, so is it a good fit for us to buy this company, or is it not? Do the financials make sense with this acquisition? And there's a bunch of other types of cases, and the idea is that you don't have to be prepared for everything, but it's good that you can try to frame the problem in some way to have a structured way of solving it. So, for example, a profitability framework, as I was mentioning, if the issue is profit, so we can frame it as divide it as a revenue problem or a cost problem. And again, the revenue can be driven or affected by a problem in price or a problem in unit sold, and the cost can be divided in variable cost and fixed cost. This is another framework, market entry. So what would you understand if you want to make a decision or a recommendation for a market entry? So you want to understand the market, the client, the client capabilities is the organization capabilities, the financials of it, and the entry strategy. So how would a case, in particular a case competition, work? So the first part that you need to do is understand the problem. So first, you would receive the prompt and possibly some additional material. That's pretty much all that you're gonna get for the rest of the case. And with that, you're expected to go search more information and give your recommendation with that limited piece of data. It's important that at first you try to do a high-level research of the industry that you're working with. So, for example, you have to understand where the industry is going, what are the trends, technological, political, just a high level. Don't dig in too much, and just to have an understanding on where the industry is going, and this will help you like align your recommendations to the reality of that industry. In some case competitions, you are allowed to ask clarifying questions, maybe a session where you can sit down or be a panel to ask questions to the client. So be prepared to think what are the questions that you want to clarify on the problem, and it's very important that you have a clear understanding of what the problem is, and this is the opportunity to ask that your understanding of the problem is the same understanding that the client or the organization is having. After understanding the problem, you have to start making hypotheses of what would be the recommendations or what are the issues that are affecting this organization. So here is where you define your framework, and is where you are going to start dividing work, or you're going to start to dividing work and align your analysis for. So the frameworks I show you are very typical, like very standard, but it's important that you do your own framework for the specific case. Don't try to put a profitability framework and just do what a profitability framework is. Try to be exhaustive in what framework are you going to use a framework gives you the structure to divide the problem and attack each of the issues of that problem individually with analysis and recommendations for each issue. And an important thing for making a hypothesis in this step is that you want to try to do hypothesis in terms of the solution you want to give. So for example, my hypothesis is that if we enter this market, we're going to get higher revenue. Or my hypothesis is if we reduce our cost, we're going to get a positive profit for X amount, or are increasing profit in X amount. So those are the hypotheses you have to make before digging into the details and before digging into the data. You have to first structure what you want to analyze, and then the next step, of course, is proving that if your hypotheses are correct or not. So for each of these hypotheses that you make in each of the components of your framework, you have to do the research, and this is like the heavy lifting of a case competition. You have to go to public information, if you get the resources from the university for private databases of information, get all the numbers you want to get, do the analysis you want to get, run the numbers, do the projections, and at this stage it's possible that some of the hypotheses you had maybe are not true. So it's okay that the hypotheses you thought were a good idea at this stage result that are not great idea, or even are a bad idea at this point. So finally, when you do the analysis, you know that your hypotheses are true. You have put numbers on those hypotheses. You know how much percentage will your market increase. You know if the product is going to be a hit or not. This is the time for making the recommendations, and this is the previous to last part before the final presentation. So in your presentation or in your slides, you're going to lay out how you're going to implement those recommendations. You're going to discuss the potential risks that come with these recommendations. So sometimes the information is not available, and you have to do reasonable assumptions. So you have to say, hey, our assumption was this. If the assumption is correct or is a little bit off, the risk is this. You have to understand all those components. And at the end, it's just having fun at the presentation. Ideally, everyone should talk and present. So it shows teamwork, but you decide how you want to do the presentation. So this is the one-by-one steps, or how would you be interacting or doing the case. So now the important part is how would you solve it? What are the actions that you need to do to solve the case? So in my opinion, the most important thing is that you lay out your framework, because the framework will be the key to the success of your case competition. So as I told you, the framework is how would you decompose the problem in multiple issues. So if it's a market entry, we'll understand the competition and do analysis on competition. We'll understand our product, we'll understand our own capabilities, like the framework I mentioned. But you have to decompose the problem, and that's how you're going to attack it. And this is going to be true for a case competition and if you want to pursue a career in consulting. As I mentioned, when you decompose the problem, it's easy to assign tasks to each of your team members to specialize in something that they want to go deep in the analysis and run the numbers for those analyses. And this is important, tailor your framework to the specific case and don't rely on the generic frameworks that I showed you. They're just for example, but you have to figure out your own framework. And when I talk about framework, don't think that it's something out of this world. It's just how would you decompose the problem in one or two levels. So the problem is this problem has 3 components, and these 3 components has 3 analysis to prove. So that's the framework. The framework should ideally be as comprehensive as possible, but this is a short time case, so rely on the most important issues that you think are the most important issues of the problem. The framework won't be the same for each team, of course, so you decide how you want to attack the problem. In terms of hypothesis and analysis, again, I'm repeating myself, but it's important. You have to frame your hypothesis as the recommendations you're going to give at the end of the presentation. So we can increase revenue by X amount if we enter the market. For example, I don't know, in one of the cases I had was we can save X amount of lives if we do this preventive medicine treatment, whatever. So you have to frame your hypothesis based on the solutions you want to give. You can frame it as what was the problem, but at the end they're not gonna, like, the client doesn't want to know the problem, the client wants to know what's the solution to their problem. And this is another recommendation. You have to balance the depth and effort of your analysis. You can go very deep, but consider that this like a short amount of time to do the case. So you have to balance how deep you get into the analysis, and it's fine to get a high-level analysis with rough numbers, with decent assumptions, rather than waste a lot of time finding the small detail that will give you the same information or the same recommendation if you step back a little bit on the depth. And then it's important that you have to base your analysis in real data, and the data that you're gonna research, that you're gonna get from the databases, that you're gonna get from the prompt. So it's fair to make assumptions, but at first base your hypothesis and analysis on real information. Finally, how to close a case, and then this is how would you present the case in the presentation. You would always want to start with the impact and recommendation. So in my honest opinion, the first page of every presentation should be an executive summary with the impact and your recommendations. That, like, in my personal opinion, if you want to do something else, it's fine. But this would give this would grasp the attention of the audience instantly, because they're going to focus on what's the impact on your solution rather than what was the problem. They already know the problem. They want the solution right up front of them, and they want to know what is the impact of the solution you're recommending. The second recommendation is you have to make very clear how would you implement your solution or recommendation. So you would have to give a roadmap with short actions, short-term actions, medium-term actions, and long-term actions. And that gives us like a sense that you know what you're doing, and you know what is attainable in the short term, what's actionable, what's a quick hit, versus what's a long-term investment that would get returns in the future. And then again, you have to acknowledge the potential risks that come with your recommendation, and not just acknowledge them, but try to propose on how would you handle them. So for example, if the preventive medicine doesn't work, we can sell it in another market, for example. It's just be very aware that it's not just identifying the risk, but how would you solve it if it presents. Okay, so for tips and recommendations, from my experience, the cases that end up the teams that end up winning the competitions are the ones that are more creative and think out of the box. You can do a good analysis, a good recommendation, but this is the opportunity to be creative, because the client, it's probable that the client already know the clear solution, like the clear. If they have the problem, they probably have thought about something standard. If you think about something out of the box, something creative, that's what gets attention of the audience and the client. This is another important one. Leverage your experience and knowledge of your team members. So, for example, in one of the cases I had, a person. It was like a market research for university, like English acceptance, like test of knowledge of English, and they asked us, in what market would you enter? So one person was very familiar with the process of agents helping people from China to get to help them to train for the test. So they inputted that knowledge and all that process into the recommendation, and if I'm not wrong, they ended up winning the contest because of that creativity, because of that piece of information they had. So if you have expertise in something, I don't know, logistics, technology, or something, leverage those insights and those skills into your recommendations. Again, it's important to use your framework to keep the structure of your analysis. Sometimes if you miss the step of the framework, you will end up shooting everywhere and try to see if you hit something. So use the framework to keep your structure, to focus on what you think is really important, and maybe an idea comes by, but if it doesn't fit your framework, it's better or to reframe your problem or to just ignore it for the time being. Another recommendation is that when you present, you have to focus on the so what. The so what means you don't want to focus on the data. For example, the market has grown 20%. So there you have to say, so what? So the market grew 20%. So there's an opportunity to enter that market and grab 5%, for example. So you have to focus on the so what, not on the piece of data, but on the actionable things that you're gonna do. And then have fun with your team. From my experience, the two cases I've been, I had no idea when I started. I didn't meet my team before. Like I met them just like in one of these sessions, and like I can say they're very good friends after the case, and I hang out with them even twice a month or so. So have fun. If you don't know the people your teammates with, don't worry. It'll be a fun time. So a little bit about my experience in case competitions. I've been in 2 case competitions. One, a McKinsey case competition last year, like around November, and at the beginning of this year, a Duolingo case competition. So the McKinsey case competition, I was finalist. I was in the top 4. This was a case of healthcare, and this was more to the side of analytical case. So besides the prompt, they gave us like a big database of patients' records, like anonymized patient records, and they expected us to get the recommendations out of the data. So that's how, in that occasion, we had a teammate that was Heinz student in business intelligence and data analytics, and he ran deep models of random tree forest, if I'm not wrong, and could make a recommendation based on that heavy analysis, and that was a little bit expected on the case. So this is a type of case where the data is the analysis is more important than the other part. But at the end, what we ended up leveraging on to get into the next round was how we were gonna implement the recommendation. So we found out that if you do preventive medicine, you could potentially save a lot of lives. But what was important for every team got to that point, because the data analysis, everyone can do data analysis. But we got to the other round because we clearly put out how we're gonna use that information and the recommendation and how we're gonna leverage in order to finally save lives. I don't know why we didn't win. And the second one was Duolingo, and this one was they wanted us to define a marketing strategy for. They had a standardized English test, like something like the TOEFL or the IELTS, and it was all online, as you would do on a class in Duolingo, and they wanted us to try to figure out how, in what market and what would be the marketing strategy for this type of test in the world. So they want us to first define the market, the target market. So we're gonna enter the Chinese market, for example, and how we were gonna enter that market. In this one, I feel that the creativity and the market expertise of the teams that won was the most important part. So thinking out of I feel that 90% of the teams proposed that the market should be China because of the volume, and the ones that ended up winning, they did China, but their solution and how they would enter that market was completely creative. This one was the one I was mentioning about, the agents and trying to fit in with the structure of the agents. So they ended up winning with this creativity. So yeah, that's my experience. I hope it was useful for you. If you have any questions, please this is the time to ask.
For the market research and sort of are there? I guess the question is, are there any resources that you've used across the competitions to do these sort of, or to make analytical assessments? What are you doing to gather this market research? Where do you turn if, for example, you're not in a business school?
You have to be creative.
Okay, maybe an example would be this is why having a good hypothesis and having having the right questions is important, because you can then focus your search. In terms of the resources, some things that stand out are maybe Gartner reports or databases online that you can access through the CMU library. Examples of databases include, I know Gartner is definitely there. Nielsen, Bloomberg. Again, these resources are only as good as the questions, because if you have very broad questions, if you haven't narrowed down exactly what you want to find, then these resources aren't going to help you. So in that sense, yeah, resources-wise, a good place to start would be looking at the CMU library databases. There's a specific section called databases where you can find information.
Yeah, and for the previous step before the deep analysis, you can go to the big consulting firms. They have reports on the industries. So there's a McKinsey report in health, or a BCG report in automotive, retail, whatever. So these are high level analysis, 2-3 pages. No detailed numbers, just broad numbers. You can start from there if you want to get a high level sense of the industry you're into.
My question was on, you mentioned a lot frameworks. Can you mention a couple of frameworks you know about and how we can find more information about them?
Yeah. So as per my recommendation, don't use a generic framework, but the typical are profitability. So you can search profitability framework, market analysis framework, and market analysis framework. This is market entry framework. You can check there are resources in books like Case in Point
By Mark Constantino.
or Case Interview by Victor Cheng. Victor Cheng has like 3 generic frameworks that pretty much cover everything that you have just to adjust them. Case in Point has like 7 or so. But again, those are just examples of what like a tip like a de facto framework is. Try to make your own framework to tailor the particular situation.
There may be problems that don't specifically fit into one framework exactly. They may include elements that cut across 3 or 4 frameworks. So take frameworks as just a general way of thinking, guiding your thinking. Because, for example, if you take a profitability case and you split that into revenue and cost, but then a way to target revenue is to actually do market entry, then you can bring in the market entry framework and then use that to guide your decision making and all that. So just because it looks like a profitability problem at the start, may not mean that it is a full profitability problem in that sense. So that's what I mean by use these frameworks to guide your thinking.
Hybrid.
Who is everyone participating in the case competition? Who is participating? Who is thinking about participating?
I see. Okay.
Of those people who have already teams. Okay, so after Justin finishes his presentation, we have time for you to mingle and find a team, find the people that last asset to complete your team and win the competition. So,
Thank you, sir.
So is like everyone familiar with like a ride sharing service such as like Uber, Lyft, or something like that? And also this other like emergent type of thing in the last like 2 years or so with like e-scooters such as Lime, Bird, something like that. So so what I want to do now is kind of share with you a presentation that I gave along with 2 other teammates. So we were a team of 3, so don't be afraid of the low end. We made it to, we were finalists at the Yale case competition with only 3 people, so the max is 5, so don't be afraid to only compete with a team of 3. So we were tasked with these questions right here, if you can see those. So yeah, you may not be able to see them, but sorry about that. But essentially it's like how can you refine the current business model to allow for increased profit margin, easier scalability, devise a new business model, and how can Bird differentiate itself from its competitors. So essentially the whole e-scooter business is losing money. I don't know if you guys realize that, but they have a lot of hardware inventories. And so those scooters cost anywhere from $500 to $600 a piece. So as you can imagine, as you try to scale those and have those in a lot of different markets, that's a lot of sunk costs in just inventory. So one of the ideas was to try to be able to understand like how can you actually revise that business model and maybe try to reframe what they currently have into a new strategy. So I didn't have this in PowerPoint mode, but I have it in PDF. So as David mentioned, one of the first things you want to do is lay out your executive summary. What is our recommendation? So we said our recommendation was Bird should revamp its business model to expand core business into both domestic and international and diversify its revenue generation. So as you can see from this presentation that the black dots are currently where Bird has where they've penetrated markets. And we suggested the Seattle area, the Houston area, and like the greater Boston area as the 3 target places for the US landscape to expand. And we also looked at some places in Europe. You can't really see the numbers here, I'm not sure why, but we definitely highlighted some places there as well for expansion. So one of the key things also, I'll kind of like digress a little bit, that it's key. So our team was comprised of like myself, who was kind of like mechanical electrical engineering. Like one person on our team was like a policy person, and another person was like really good at financial modeling. As you'll see at the end, she did like a fantastic job with that. So I highly like recommend like if you have like a diverse set of skill sets to try to progress with this. So this was kind of like also our thinking that Bird should expand also to a B2B fleet inside of. So these are kind of our two pillar recommendations, that they should first expand into more markets, as well as being able to diversify their offerings and offer a B2B fleet management system, as well as their core consumer fleet. And I kind of go into why we kind of suggested that. Hopefully I remember in a minute. And so first we did kind of like a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And some of the strengths, obviously, convenient physical scooter hardware. Some of the weaknesses were, the market was extremely sensitive to the gross margin, as I think it's in the next chart. Investor concern with scalability. The opportunities that we felt were, again, was what our executive summary stated was, we think that there's opportunities for expansion for a B2B fleet, as well as like expansion, university expansions, because like Bird actually, we felt that they could also expand to like universities, and or a redesign that's later in the presentation. And some of the threats were, again, there's tons of these different types of competitors popping up. It seems as though when we started researching, it's more than just like 3 of them. There's like 50 to 100 of them. Like it's surprising how many of these have popped up like really quickly. And again, you can find all that information on like sources that David and Shreyas mentioned, like the University Library and stuff like that, or like TechCrunch, a lot of different places like that. So we analyzed their gross margin, and we pulled all these numbers in our references or at the end of the presentation, and we kind of looked at what are the biggest cost areas, and some of it. So they have like a huge cost in terms of like charging, the repairs, and as well as I forget what 3 is. But anyway, so they had like a certain thing. So essentially, their gross margin was small. So but when you look at their next, the cost of certain things, so they don't have a lot of room for error. So when you look at like the sunk cost in terms of hardware, they were losing money essentially. So we looked at some like the key parameters and like how like the market was flatlining. So one of our biggest examples was the number of consumers that we kind of liken the case of Bird to Snapchat. So when your consumers start to flatline, it's a direct correlation with the revenue generation that you're able to create. So we saw also that from their consumer growth that it was flatlining, and so we were trying to suggest that they could follow a same like fate as, not fate because Snapchat is still alive, but they could follow a similar trajectory in terms of like revenue. And again, so this is like a key number that we found, that their monthly download rate was declining by 20%, which is a lot. So again, some of the key factors that we wanted to recommend was this kind of like this idea of stuff that they should focus on. And again, so there's this B2B idea, as well as understanding like what other factors were in place in terms of like,
I'm sorry, what is B2B?
Business to business.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. If I say something that you don't know what I mean, just like let me know. And so SaaS is software as a service, and we wanted them to definitely look at their profitability. So again, we went more into details in terms of the key factors for growth and scalability. And as I mentioned in our executive summary slide, was about the key areas that we wanted them to target. So essentially, we just looked at their biggest competitor, which is Lime. And Lime has already penetrated markets in Seattle, Boston, and Houston. And when we looked at Bird, they haven't penetrated those areas. We figured that should be the first place that they try to penetrate. And we also saw that neither one of them had a location in Las Vegas, Nevada. We thought with so much tourism and so much influx into the area on like a daily basis, and also with going to Vegas and the strip being flat, we figured that could have possibly been another area that they could have penetrated. So just like common knowledge things like that are also at play when also trying to make a key factors for whatever you're trying to recommend. So this chart was mostly about looking at like the most populous cities and Bird's presence in those cities. So we looked at most populous, we looked at populations with low income as well as the most youthful cities. And this also kind of helped help determine also why we picked the certain areas that we picked. So like Seattle, Houston, and the greater Boston, New York City area. So that was also like another chart that we showcased. And this was mostly about the European market, because it also supported our initial executive summary that they should focus on scalability into 3 specific US areas and also to their European market. And you can't really see the numbers, so I'll kind of skip that. So this talks about this idea that we had about this business B2B partnerships. So we felt that they could also offer like fleet management systems. So the idea would be is Bird would supply a certain amount of fleets to big businesses in like greater metropolitan areas, and they would have these stations specifically for their workers when they were ready to leave and arrive and departing from work. And yeah, so these were the, and we got this idea because we saw that the competitors were starting to make key partnerships that we felt that we were trying to anticipate the market. So Lime had already partnered with Uber, Lyft had partnered with Motivate, and Ofo is like this massive Chinese brand that had popped up. And so we were thinking that what could these partnerships be thinking for the next step? So we tried to anticipate that maybe they may also be trying to look at a B2B fleet. So we tried to pitch this as an idea of something that we would try to implement in terms of from a strategies perspective. And the model would provide like a platform to create new streams of income, like software as a service income and scooter sales. One of our other recommendations, what I think kind of sets us apart, was the idea of designing our own like bird frame. So birds currently, they don't have like this improvement that we tried to recommend. So we said give bird more wings. So the idea was that, say if you have a scooter, and if we design these flanges that pop out on the side, maybe someone may be more inclined to use the e-scooter for more time to maybe pick up groceries or something like that. So currently you don't have, if you need to use a scooter to go to a grocery store or some type of departmental store, like riding a scooter and carrying bags is kind of like cumbersome. So the idea was if we did like a redesign on the actual frame, maybe we can have consumers on the bikes loan, which will also directly affect the revenue. So we decided if they could do like a redesign on the actual stem frame of the actual e-scooter, that maybe could help with some of the profitability. And that kind of detailed what I kind of just said. And so this is kind of an analysis where I mentioned it's great having a person on the team that can like do stuff like this. So she ran like a lot of Monte Carlo simulations and like really detailed like analytical models with finance and stuff like that, and trying to, in future forward projections. And she explained all of this and all of her assumptions that went into this. And we talked about the flange idea. We had another like, little small recommendation with like this extra battery. Yeah, I won't get into that too much, but essentially, like she ran probably like anywhere from 50 to 100 models of like she just fed a lot of different assumptions. And once we figured out what we felt were the best ideas to run with, those are the kind of ideas that we ran with the market projections. And so we had like charts like this in the presentation where, again, she talked about these because she ran them, and I won't try to talk about them because I didn't run them. But yeah, so we have like some projections, like 1, 5, 10 year models about how can we, first keeping those initial questions in mind, how can we address the recreating like the business structure and business framework, and how can we recreate a positive return on the revenue. And again, this was like really our meat of our recommendations here, where again, this heat map to this financial analysis was also applied, along with our recommendations for franchising things out to this kind of like B2B type of thing, and fleet management, and the software as a service platform. And again, this was expanding our offerings. Yeah, I kind of shoot to here. All right, so at the beginning you saw that I showed the same figure about what our executive summary looks like. So it always is important to lay out specifically what your recommendation is. In the presentation, we try to know what our recommendation is, and then the key factors that support that recommendation in terms of profitability, where specifically we were trying to penetrate, how we're going to try to penetrate, and some of the new offerings that we're going to offer in terms of the B2B fleet, and also the new enhancements to the actual bike frame. So some of those were our factors that affected our main recommendation, and how we're going to actually try to penetrate these new markets from a domestic perspective and from an international perspective, first starting in Europe. And again, this is the same chart that kind of outlines specifically that, splitting us off into a core consumer fleet and the B2B fleet. And we're going to do that with the software as a service application and have that in this continuous loop cycle. And that was kind of a thank you slide we had. So this is meant to just as a kind of give you an idea of like what maybe a slide deck may look like in response to a case prompt. So this is by all means like not a gold standard to maybe try to frame yours by, but maybe an idea to have something to visualize and what a presentation may look like. And these are like just kind of like some backup slides that we had. Some other profitability analysis, and these are our references that we base a lot of our stuff from. So some of the sources are like Forbes, Grandview Research, TechCrunch, Niche, Google, Statista, The Verge, The Zebra, whatever. So a couple others. So is there any questions about anything I presented, or maybe something wasn't clear about like how we went about something, or just, yeah?
I guess the numbers and stuff that you use, was that all just information you found in various databases, or kind of through your own research, or was any of that
Right.
kind of given to you?
Right, so a lot of the information what you'll find is companies don't like to share, especially if they're private. Making an educated assumption and guess, educated approximation about, okay, I know batteries, just say for instance, I know batteries range in this range. I know material may be this range. It's just kind of making an educated assumption on how to project costs, because everything may not be available. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so you kind of showed briefly like a prototype for a new feature on the scooters.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, how effective has it been like presenting a new feature or something along those lines versus a new strategy around?
Right, so I mean, we felt that they really liked that idea. So with us, some of the feedback that we got from the very final round was they felt that we had a good initial recommendation, but they felt we had too many moving parts underneath the original recommendation.
Okay.
And so, I mean, which could be good or bad. I mean, I guess they felt that it was too much. So, but it just kind of varies about whatever you feel may be a good approach to trying to attack the problem. Yeah.
Is there anything like after you competed in a competition that you wish you would have like spent a little more time or less time on?
Right. Yeah. So with us, I guess so. Probably one of the drawbacks. Again, I I still think we did well with a 3-person team, but one of the drawbacks of like maybe like a smaller team was that maybe we could have spent a little bit more time on like polishing the slides more. Because the other 3 teams that made it to the final round, their slides were probably like better than ours. But so it just really depends on like how you value like the content that you're presenting versus the aesthetic appeal of it. So maybe if we had to go back, we'd probably maybe have like better transitions, because sometimes they had some stuff that popped at you. And I mean, I don't know how important that is, but maybe. So if we had to spend more time, it'd probably be on maybe polishing more the slides more and how we presented some of the information.
How many times do you guys practice with each other? Like presenting wise?
So we actually practiced, I think, twice actually. So we didn't practice that much because so kind of like a timeline of like how we approached it was, so you get a week. You get a week to get a prompt and then try to address it. So I think we spent maybe like the first 2 days just really just taking like a high level, and I think each person individually kind of sketched out an idea of what they thought, and we came together and like David mentioned, we came together and created what we felt were the important parts. Then we made an assignment based off of strengths and who could do what, and then we delegated stuff. Then we went like kind of individually and kind of met back as we needed to kind of like start to pull things together. But we didn't pull like the final presentation together until like the very last day, and then we submitted everything. So we got all the slides to this date and submitted it within the last 2 days. But we didn't really start because we wanted to make sure we ran like a lot of the analysis and stuff first, then pulled everything together then.
What are the backgrounds of your teammates?
One was like financial like modeling, but she does like a lot of data analysis stuff. But she's in like civil engineering, but her work is more so like data analysis. And another person was like policy. I think it's the MSTP program, Master of Science Technology Policy program here at CMU. Then I'm in the mechanical engineering department, and I work on that, and also like a ECE type project with the flexible electronics.
Do you have any insight with like the questions and answers that the judges were asking you after the presentation? What kind of questions were the judges asking?
So they mostly just, so how it works is that you present and then they ask you questions. So it was like mostly about like why did we make, like, why not like these regions? And for this chart, for example, why didn't you pick them to penetrate a market here? Stuff like that, just kind of like, why did you pick like the things that you did, and what was the strategy behind maybe trying to implement like a B2B fleet, or or maybe some of the risks in terms of some of the design considerations that you made.
Were there any questions that stumped you or that you weren't prepared for, you feel?
I don't think so. I think for us, I think, so in the initial rounds, you compete in like a small setting, right? It's just like going to be you and the judges. But if you advance to the final round, you have to give your presentation in front of everybody, which is like you go from one extreme to all the way to the other end. So I think just being able to, balance, being able to talk in a closed setting, then getting in front of 100 people, like within like 2 hours is for sure something to be prepared for. But it helps you because you have the opportunity to speak in front of a lot of people and still support your claims and show off the work that you worked hard for.
In the first round and the last round, did you spend time reiterating PowerPoint or presentation?
So during this competition, they didn't allocate a time to change anything, which would have probably helped, because you get like some feedback from the first round from the judges that maybe you guys could have tweaked this or that. So yeah, there was no time during this one. It wasn't.
How diverse is the audience? So like, for example, like how specific, like if some people have no idea what consulting is about or don't really understand the cases and stuff like that. So, yeah, like how would you tailor, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, this was actually my first case competition, and
Right.
I was a finalist. So I wouldn't just be worried about this, maybe it's your first time or last or second time or anything like that. But I think it was actually like quite a few people that competed. It was their very first time. It was some people that had maybe done another one before. Is that what you're asking about?
Oh no, I meant like, because you're going to be presenting to an audience, right?
Mhm.
So like, would this audience have knowledge of basically all the terms that you're going to be speaking about? So like everyone would understand your.
Oh yeah, so the idea is that everyone's going to compete. Then out of the people who are competing, the 4 teams are going to be selected for like the final round.
Right.
So essentially, the audience is going to be people who essentially weren't selected for the final round.
I
Yeah.
think it's a judge's question.
Oh, the
Who are
judges.
judges?
Oh, I see the judges. Oh, I completely misinterpreted you again. I apologize. But yeah, so the judges are going to have like they're going to be aware of what the prompt is.
Right.
Yes.
Do you feel like this helped you beyond just a preparation thing, or do you feel like you actually got job prospects as a result of this?
I mean, I think it helped in both perspectives, honestly, because you're presenting something completely different. Like before this, I had not spent much time thinking about scooters, like at all, to be honest. And then you're presented with something that a incredibly interesting prompt, and you're in a time crunch. So I don't know your background, but for me as a PhD student, things are kind of really spread out. So, but this kind of really allows those same transferable skills to be condensed into a week time frame. So I felt as if it was really important and impactful to like my perspective, and definitely get an opportunity to present my ideas and in front of people, and then also with the networking opportunities that also came with it. So I felt it was like both useful from both perspectives. All right. Are there any other questions? Yeah, so I think this may be a good time for maybe people to introduce themselves, or if you're still looking for a team or still considering anything, or maybe want to have some one-on-one questions,